guys, this is Angela and welcome to my channel. I'm an artist who has been drawing pretty seriously for the past 10 years. I studied animation at Gurney College from 2010 to 2014. Since graduation, I worked in the animation industry for 6 years as a background painter and environment designer. Since June of this year, I've quit my job in animation and just became a full-time freelance artist for myself. So before I start today's video, I'll quickly show you guys some of my drawings and hopefully you guys can see my progress in the past 6 years at least. This is a drawing I did in 2014 preparing for my graduation project at Sheridan. I did a little color script of my short film. It was really fun and I used oil pastel, but you can tell it's really rough. Here's a painting I did with gouache in 2016. I was already at Vancouver at the time. I did this painting early in the morning based on what I saw outside of my apartment window. This is from this year, 2020. I did this drawing based on what I saw at the Banff viewpoint alongside some reference and video reference that I've taken. Hopefully you notice some progress and some improvement in my art. I can definitely feel that I've improved a lot in the past 10 years, especially in the past 4 years. So in today's video, I want to tackle a question that every artist probably has thought about at one point. How do you improve your art? I want to share with you guys 5 things, or more specifically 5 areas of knowledge that I've learned in the past 10 years that I think have really helped me to improve my art. So the first point or area of knowledge that I want to talk about is perspective or anatomy. This depends on if you're into landscape or portraiture/character design. I think there's this notion that you need to be a master at perspective or anatomy in order to make really great and believable drawings. I don't think that's necessarily true. For perspective, you don't really need to know the scientific aspect or mathematical calculation to make a really great drawing. And for anatomy, you don't need to remember every single muscle and every single bone to create a believable movement for your character. So I'm going to talk about perspective specifically. So for perspective, I think all you need to know is 1-point and 2-point perspective. Unless you want to do concept art for game or animation, you wouldn't really need to make a drawing that's so dynamic that you need to use 3-point perspective. So for 1-point and 2-point perspective, all you need to know is where to set your horizon line and where to set your vanishing point. If you are working digitally, it might be helpful if you turn down the grid of perspective to help you see how things are aligned. But if you're drawing on a sketchbook or just doing a really loose drawing based on your imagination, sometimes you can just eyeball the perspective, and that's what I do all the time. I never take out my ruler and try to see how everything fits exactly. I just really try to pay attention to how lines, especially lines that are really close to each other, are slanted and pointing into one vanishing point. I find that with amateur-looking drawing, the biggest problem is inconsistency in perspective. For example, in a drawing, one building can be vanishing towards one point, and the building next to it somehow is vanishing towards another point. The viewer will easily pick up on that mistake, and the drawing will instantly feel a bit wonky. You can definitely cheat perspective if there are two things very far away from each other, or if the background element and the foreground element is slightly off in terms of perspective. You can definitely cheat that. But when objects are really close together, pay attention to if their perspective is consistent. So the second area of knowledge that I want to talk about is lighting and having consistent lighting in your drawing. Having a strong lighting plan is the best way to guarantee a successful drawing. It's pretty cloudy and overcast today, and that's the sort of lighting that I would not choose as an artist. For me personally, I prefer sunny days. Sunny days provides us with so many more opportunities as an artist. There are brighter, vibrant colors, dappled lighting, really interesting cast shadow shapes, and of course, high contrast. Whether I am picking a real-life location to observe from or a reference photo to draw from, the first thing that I pay attention to is whether or not there is strong lighting in the composition. And once you have a lighting plan, whether it's having a really interesting street lamp lighting up the scene or having really strong direct sunlight, once you've decided on your lighting plan, it's important to have that light source consistently influence everything in your drawing. If you have a really strong warm light source, is everything surrounding it taking on a warmer tone? The color and strength of your light source impacts the color of everything around it. Not only does it affect how the surface facing the light source looks, it also affects the cast shadow, how strong it is it blurred out around the edges, and what color it takes on. Really try to pay attention to how lighting and your light source affects your color choices. So the third really important point or area of knowledge is understanding color theory. Color theory seems really complicated, but just as perspective, you don't need to be an absolute expert at it to make a really good drawing. Knowing the basics of color theory and having a visual library in your brain is the key to finding the right colors for your drawing. You need to understand how different colors are produced under different lighting and how they interact with each other. I actually have 2 videos on my channel that talks specifically about color theory, so if you haven't seen them already, check them out. So once you know the basics of color theory, now it's really important to start building a visual library in your brain. And what do I mean by this? Basically, think of your eyes as the color picker in Photoshop and try to pick up on everything around you and really take note of all the colors you see. Think of it as a training for your eyes and your brain. I've been training my eyes for the past 6 years, and now when I look at something, I can quickly identify how bright it is, how saturated it is, how warm or cool it looks against another color. So those are all things that you have to train your eyes to understand, because as kids we've been taught certain things, like tree trunk is brown, leaves are green, sky is blue, clouds are white. Try to delete these abstract color ideas from your brain and really analyze what's in the real world. Take a look at the door that's in your room or the white walls if you have white walls. What color do they take when they're under direct sunlight? And how do they look on a cloudy, overcast day? Once you've built a big enough library in your mind, you can then combine that with color theory that you know. Then you are pretty much invincible because you know what the local color of the wall is, and you know how it will look under direct sunlight, and you know how the shadow will shift towards a cooler color, how much pink and blue do you need to add into it. When you're doing this training, try to catalog colors into warm and cool colors, or catalog them into warmer version of a color or cooler version of a color. For example, green can be really warm and almost close to yellow under sunlight. Sometimes it can be really gray and there's a lot of blue in it when it's on a really cloudy day. The same applies for gray. Gray isn't always just gray. One mistake I see a lot of beginner artists make is when they add a lot of grays and blacks into their painting, thinking they are portraying reality. But in reality, there isn't absolute black. It's always mixed in with the lighting. For example, once you have a warm lighting, the grays and the blacks become brownish or reddish. Think of gray in terms of temperature. If it's warmer, add a bit of light orange or skin pastel into it. If it's cooler, add a bit of blue or purple into it. We definitely pay a lot of attention to color as artists, but the next area that I want to talk about is not something that everyone pays attention to, and that is tonal value. It basically means how light or how dark something appears, the lightness of one color, and the contrast it creates against another color. Tonal value is directly associated with the amount of contrast in your image. And the key to creating a successful drawing is when you can place the highest contrast at areas you want the viewers to look at. And you can achieve this by controlling the tonal value of the colors you use. When we think of color, we shouldn't just be thinking of its hues. We should also think about the color's saturation and lightness. For example, if you have a blue and a yellow that has the same saturation and lightness, the blue probably will appear darker. But if you adjust the lightness and saturation of the blue and compare it to a really bright, really saturated yellow, the yellow in reality is actually darker than that really light blue. If you are working digitally, a really great way to check your tonal value and contrast is by turning your painting into black and white. This way you can easily see if all the contrasts are still there without the help of color. If you are working traditionally like me, you just have to train your eyes to really detect how light a color is compared to the color next to it. Another slightly more complex theory that I want to introduce is grouping tonal values. This is really important when it comes to paintings where you have a really clear division of foreground, midground, and background. And you can often see this grouping in live action cinematography or animation backgrounds. For example, you have an overlay of trees and branches in the foreground, and because they're closer to the camera, they appear darker. You then have a layer of midground. And then finally, you have a layer of background of mountains or other things that's really faded away. So what you want to do is you want to group everything within the foreground into a certain range so that there isn't unnecessary pop of contrast in that range. You don't want to distract the viewer, and you don't want to confuse the viewer into thinking something that's close to the camera is actually further away. So by controlling tonal value and grouping things, you're really just making it easier for the viewer to identify where everything is in the picture. You definitely want to leave the highest contrast to where you want the viewer to look at, and make sure that everything else does not compete with that level of contrast. A really successful drawing is where audience can really easily navigate in the drawing and look at what the artist intended for the viewers to look at. So that kind of brings me to my final point, which is composition and focus. Before you start a drawing, doesn't matter what it is, you want to really think about what it is that I really want to capture. What was the initial spark or idea that I really wanted to put down on paper? For example, if you wanted to capture the gradient in the sky with some clouds covering the sun, you want to make sure you have a composition that favors the sky and not, the buildings in front of it that you actually don't really care about. So basically, you want to identify the element or elements in your drawing that you actually really truly care about, and make sure that everything you do, every stroke that you put down, is to help bring the focus to this element. Don't get distracted or fixate on detail that doesn't matter or that will complicate your drawing. Try to eliminate anything that isn't contributing to your drawing. Think of an artist as a filter. We see something beautiful, and what we're doing is we're trying to capture the essence of it. We filter out anything that isn't important, and whatever that's left, we arrange it in a way that accentuates the beauty that we want the viewers to see. And composition is the tool that we use to achieve this goal. You need to at least be aware of the rule of thirds and golden ratio. Avoid tangents. Tangents is when two lines overlap just perfectly or touching perfectly and makes it really uncomfortable and unpleasing to look at. And most importantly, create balance in your composition. If you have something really big and heavy on the left side, make sure you have things on the right side to balance it out. I know that a lot of art teachers or a lot of art books suggest that you should break the rules, but you can only successfully break the rules if you understand what the rules are. So that's it for the 5 key areas of knowledge you need to know in order to improve your art. Aside from these 5 big areas of knowledge, there are 2 things that I want to quickly touch upon. So the first is the use of reference. And I would say I actually recommend against beginner artists using a lot of reference, because when you don't understand the underlying knowledge and the foundation behind what's going on, what you're really doing when you're copying a reference is you're transferring over information that you don't truly understand. Reference can be really useful, and it definitely has helped me in the past few years to make my drawings look more solid, but I would suggest that before you have a really solid foundation of knowledge, try not to rely too much on reference. In my early days of drawing, I definitely did not rely on reference. I was always sketching outside and learning by observation. But once you have all the necessary knowledge, the reference photo is merely just a tool to help you construct an image you already have in your mind. So the second thing I want to briefly talk about is it true that if you draw every day, you will improve? I think it's only true if you are drawing with a very conscious mind. You need to be conscious of what exactly you are drawing and what you want to achieve. You need to also objectively look at your past drawings and analyze what's weak about them. Notice your mistakes and try to fix them as soon as possible. When you notice a weak point in your drawing, instead of avoiding it, try to really look into books that will help you overcome that weak point. In the past 10 years, in the first 4 years in school, I pretty much drew every day, constantly, and that was the period of time that I grew the most. After I graduated, actually having a life, having a job, and having a family, it's harder to put time into drawing. But drawing a little bit every day will definitely help you improve. So I hope this video is helpful to you. If it is, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. I would really appreciate that. And if you like drawing and you want to improve, check out my channel, and I have loads of videos where I teach more art knowledge.